If you've been following the channel for a while now, you'll know that I'm all for healthy goodness. Most of the time, but sometimes you need something a little bit more indulgent. It could be for a birthday or a celebration such as Christmas, which is getting closer and closer now. So today I've got for you 3 incredible desserts ranging from easy to hard, but they're all still very much manageable to cook. So let's get baking and let me know in the comments which one you'll be making. For our first recipe, our easiest one, we're going to be making a 1-bowl sticky ginger cake. Start by adding the dry ingredients to a bowl, which includes some plain flour and some wholemeal flour. Then a selection of spices. Of course, we've got some ginger powder, and then we've got some cinnamon, some ground clove, allspice, and finally some freshly ground nutmeg. To give the cake its rise, we're going to be adding both baking powder and baking soda, and then we'll add some muscovado brown sugar. Then a pinch of salt to enhance the flavour of the cake, and then we're going to simply whisk all the ingredients together. Now we'll add the wet ingredients, starting with a mix of golden syrup and black treacle. These will make the cake beautifully malty and sticky. You could also use molasses or maple syrup. Next, some plant milk, and then some rapeseed oil or any oil that doesn't have too much flavour. Some vegan yoghurt for a slight tang, but also to react with the bicarbonate of soda, giving the cake a lovely fluffy texture. Then just gently stir the mix together until there are no streaks of flour left. These next 2 ingredients you can actually add with the wet ingredients. We're going to start with 1 grated apple, and this is going to help keep the cake nice and moist. You could also use a pear, but we're just going to simply peel it and grate it. The zest of an orange would also be really nice in this cake. Orange goes really well with ginger. This is a really easy way of grating apple. You just grate one side, turn it 90 degrees, and repeat until you've just got the core left. This is one of my favourite ingredients to use. It's stemmed ginger. It's essentially preserved young root of ginger that's been peeled and cooked in a sugar syrup, and it's got a lovely chewy texture. I've got 3 decent pieces here, and I'm just going to finely chop them, and they're going to add a lovely chewy and slightly fragrant spicy flavour to the cake. Add these in and just gently stir them through. I'd usually add them with the wet ingredients, but I just totally forgot, to be honest. Next, we're going to line the cake tin. I'm using a circular tin, but ideally you'd have a square 9-inch tin. Here I'm going to make a cartouche by folding a square piece of parchment paper until I have just a thin triangle. If you've got a non-stick tin, then feel free to skip this step. Then measure to the middle of your tin and cut off the remaining parchment paper, and then you'll have a perfect circle ready to go in your tin. You can also use the offcuts to line the sides of the tins if you need to. I like to be better safe than sorry and just line the whole tin, and then you know for sure the cake is going to come out perfectly. Pour your cake batter in and gently smooth out the top. I baked this for about 40 minutes, but it's good to start checking around 35. It should have a slight spring to it, and if you insert a skewer into it, it will come out mostly clean. If there's just a few little crumbs on the skewer, then that's a good sign that it's cooked. While the ginger cake is cooking, we're going to make a quick toffee sauce. Into a pan, add the brown sugar with the white thicker part of a can of coconut milk. You can also add a little bit of the water from the can as well. Then bring this to a simmer, and we're going to add 30 ml of maple syrup, and then we'll simmer it for about 10 to 15 minutes until it's thick and glossy. It will go quite a dark brown colour, and it's going to be perfect on top of the ginger cake with some lovely vanilla ice cream. You could add some vanilla essence or ginger powder to give it a nice little extra kick. Once your cake is cooked, remove it from the oven and place it onto a wire rack. Remove the paper, and we're just going to leave that to cool for about 30 minutes. Ideally we would have a square tin, but I didn't have one, so I've just gone out with this circular one, and I've just evened out the edges, and I definitely didn't eat all those edges. Or maybe I did. As you can see, we've got a lovely fluffy inside, and the stemmed ginger is perfectly distributed throughout the cake. Pour a generous amount of the toffee sauce on top, followed by a nice scoop of vegan vanilla ice cream. Let's try that again. This is the perfect dessert for a cold day, perhaps after a roast dinner, and it's really easy, literally anyone could make it. Next up, we've got the medium level bake, or level 2. We're going to make a black forest chocolate tart, which is just totally divine. Start by making the base of the tart by processing the hazelnuts into a sand-like texture. I don't like it too fine as it adds a nice crunch to the base. Then add in your ground almonds. Medjool dates, mine were quite soft, but if yours aren't, you can soak them in some hot water for a few minutes before adding them. Then some cocoa powder and a little bit of salt to really bring out the chocolatey flavour. And finally a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Process this until it starts to come together. It may look a little bit dry at first, but as the dates break down and the nuts release their oils, it will start to come together. You'll have a sort of wet sand texture, and we'll just press this into the tart base. I'm using a cake tin with a loose base so it's easier to get out of the tin once we've chilled it. Just to make sure this chilled tart is really easy to get out later, I've lightly greased the tin and put some parchment paper in there. Add in your mix and press it down firmly so it creates a nice solid base to the tart, and when we go to slice it, it all stays together. Next we're going to make the cherry compote, which will go on top of the nutty base. I'm using some frozen dark cherries. You can use fresh or canned if you like. Add these to a pan with a little brown sugar, although in hindsight I probably didn't need to add the sugar as the cherries were already quite sweet. And if you're feeling it a little naughty, you can add a little bit of kirsch, which is a liquor made from cherries, so it adds a really nice extra cherry kick. This is of course optional, but just in case you're worried, the alcohol will completely be cooked out. So we'll just cook down the cherries into a really nice jam. I like to sort of break apart the cherries as they cook so that they release their juices. Since it was a little bit too sweet, I decided to add some lemon juice just to add a bit more tartness. Pour your cherry jam onto the nutty chocolatey base and then just spread it out evenly with a spoon or spatula. The final layer will be a deliciously indulgent chocolate ganache, and of course we're going to start it with some good quality dark chocolate. Simply chop the chocolate into small pieces. It's important you don't have too many big pieces as they won't melt when we put the hot coconut milk on top. This is a classic ganache, so we're going to do equal parts chocolate to the coconut milk. In a small saucepan we're going to add the thick white part of a can of coconut milk, and then we're going to add enough of the watery part to bring it up to 300ml. Heat it up until it's just simmering but not boiling. Then pour onto your dark chocolate and leave to sit for about 2 to 3 minutes. Now it's the fun part, simply whisk together until you have a beautifully smooth chocolate ganache, and just try not to eat it all now. I always like to add a little pinch of sea salt as it really brings out the bitter, rich chocolate flavour. This ganache recipe you could also use to make your own chocolate truffles. Simply put it in the fridge to set, and then you can ball it up and coat it in chopped pistachios, desiccated coconut, or cocoa powder. Now you've got your lovely rich chocolate ganache, we're going to pour it on top of the cherry compote, and then we'll just give the tart a little tap on the surface and shake it slightly to smooth out the chocolate. You could also use a spoon or spatula just to make sure it's all spreaded nice and evenly. As an optional extra for decorating this tart, I've melted some white chocolate in the microwave on the lowest setting as it can burn really easily. Then just drizzle lines across the tart. I'm using a squeezy bottle here, but a piping bag works really well, or even just a spoon. It'll be a little bit more messy, but it does do the job. Then using a toothpick or a small sharp knife, just drag lines across the white chocolate to create this gorgeous feathered effect. You can also go back the other way to make it look even cooler. This feathering technique looks really great, but it's actually very easy to do, great for impressing your friends and family. To remove the tart from its tin, I'm going to place a small bowl or cup underneath it, and then you can just sort of press down on the tin and it should come off easily. Just try not to touch the top as you'll leave your fingerprints on it or smear the design. Then boil some water, and I'm just carefully dipping my knife into it, taking it out and then wiping off any excess water. So you've now got a really hot knife which is going to get perfect slices of chocolate tart. As you can see, you've got a lovely smooth finish on the chocolate there. This is perfect for afternoon tea or a really lovely dessert after a light meal, as it is quite rich. Now for level 3, the hardest dessert we're going to make. We're making a lemon meringue pie which has 3 components to it, and it's a little bit more complex. Oh, so indulgent. The chocolate is just incredibly creamy. This is so indulgent. You've got rich, creamy chocolate, then you've got the nice bit of tart cherry, and then finally you've got that nutty, crunchy base to finish it off. Definitely give this one a go. Perfect for a treat after dinner with some friends or family.
We'll start with the buttery short crust pastry. So I've got some plain flour, icing sugar and a pinch of salt in a food processor. Then add your vegan butter, make sure it's very cold, so take it out of the fridge just before using it. You can either slice it or cube it, it doesn't really matter too much. Pulse until you've got a rough sand-like texture. Don't blend it for too long, it's okay to have a few slightly bigger pieces of butter. Then we're going to add some ice cold water to the mix and blend again briefly just until it starts to come together. Don't let it completely form into a ball, as that will overwork the gluten in the flour and result in a tough pastry. Onto a lightly floured worktop, empty out the food processor. Then gently bring your dough together, making sure not to knead it too much. I like to then form it into a disc so it's easier to roll out later on. Having nice cold hands here really does help, so sometimes I'll actually just stick my hands into the freezer before I handle the pastry. Then just wrap the pastry in some parchment paper and place it in the fridge for at least 30 minutes, ideally a bit longer, to let the butter cool down and also let the pastry, the gluten, relax. While it's cooling, we're going to quickly reduce the chickpea water to make a really thick aquafaba. You can make meringue with regular chickpea water, but by reducing it you get a really thick gelatinous mix that acts more like an egg white. Simply bring the chickpea water to a simmer and reduce by half. Mine started at 300ml and then reduced to 150ml. Then just leave to the side to cool. Back to the pastry, and we're going to lightly dust the worktop, then gently roll out the pastry. I like to start from the middle of the pastry and roll up, then from the middle and roll down, and simply turn the pastry 45 degrees and repeat the process. Keep rolling out the pastry until it's about the depth of a £1 coin, or just a few millimeters thin. Don't worry if it starts to crack a little bit around the edges, as we can smooth that out later on. Using the rolling pin, roll the pastry onto it and then drape it over your tart case. I very lightly grease the tart case just to make sure it doesn't stick. Then simply ease the pastry into it, being careful not to break it. Once it's in, you can start to gently push it into the grooves using your fingers, but make sure they've been lightly floured. This will help prevent your fingers from melting the butter in the pastry. For a safer option, you could leave the pastry overhanging the edges and then you could trim it off after it's baked, or for a slightly risky option, which I'm going to do, I'm going to roll the rolling pin over the top and remove it now. If you haven't done much pastry before, I'd suggest leaving it overhanging and baking it like that. Now we can get in close and gently push the pastry into the grooves. It's a good idea for the pastry to go slightly higher than the tart case, as it's likely to shrink a bit while baking as the gluten relaxes. Prick the base of the tart with a fork to let the air escape from the bottom. Also make sure you keep any excess pastry, so just in case you get a hole in your tart case, you can quickly just put in a little bit of extra pastry while it's baking. Now screw up a piece of baking paper and place it onto the pastry, followed by some baking beans or rice to weigh it down. This will help stop the pastry from rising, and the beans will heat up and help cook the pastry. Press them firmly in and then place your pastry in the fridge for about 30 minutes to cool, or longer if you can. Then place your tart case into the preheated oven and bake for 15 minutes, then remove the beans and increase the oven temperature by 20 degrees, and we're going to bake it for a further 10 minutes until lightly golden and cooked through. Next up, we're going to make the delicious lemon curd filling. Start by zesting 2 lemons into a small saucepan. The zest is quite oily and contains lots of lovely lemony flavour, so definitely don't skip this step. Then we'll just juice a few lemons to get roughly 150ml of lemon juice. Into the saucepan add your plant milks. I'm using coconut and oat milk. I like to use a bit of coconut milk for the higher fat content, which makes a really nice indulgent lemon curd. Then some sugar, corn flour and also a little bit of turmeric to help colour the lemon curd. Yellow food colouring would also work well. And then some agar-agar to help set the lemon curd. This is key for getting a really nice clean slice of lemon pie that doesn't spill out when you cut it. Heat the pan over a medium heat until it starts to thicken. It's important to bring it to a boil to activate the agar-agar, as it only starts working at a certain temperature. Then cook around for 10 minutes until thick and glossy. Finally, I'm going to add some vegan butter to make it beautifully creamy and rich. Simply stir it in until it melts. Take off the heat and leave to cool just for a few minutes and then pour into your tart case. You can then leave it to cool at room temperature for a couple of hours I think it's best not to put it in the fridge as this can make the pastry go soggy. Just look at that glossy finish, that is going to be absolutely delicious. So for the final component of this lemon meringue pie, we're going to make the Italian meringue. Into a large bowl, add the reduced aquafaba and cream of tartar and whisk until you achieve soft peaks. As we're making Italian meringue, we'll be heating up the sugar, which is then poured into the meringue and starts to cook it. So into a pan, we're going to add the sugar, some water, and also a little bit of agar-agar, which is going to help stop the meringue from collapsing. I'll be using a thermometer to check the temperature of the sugar, and then once it reaches roughly 118 degrees, it's ready to pour into the meringue. If it was French meringue, we would just add the sugar tablespoon by tablespoon into the whipped aquafaba, but then the pie would need to be cooked in the oven afterwards, whereas with Italian meringue, the hot sugar will cook the meringue, and then all we have to do is blowtorch it afterwards. So I had a bit of a nightmare here and couldn't get the second whisk into the mixer, but I just about got it done with the one, so it was all good. Drizzle the sugar into the meringue, being careful not to get any on yourself. It's a good idea to sort of drizzle it down the side of the bowl so it doesn't go right into the whisk and fly everywhere. I'd also suggest putting the bowl onto a wet tea towel so it doesn't move around quite as much. Now for the fun part, I'm going to pipe on the meringue using a star nozzle. You can also just dollop it on and smooth it out with a spoon if you like. The key with piping is to maintain a steady pressure on the back of the piping bag and not to use the front. As you can see, we've got lovely thick meringue, it's glossy, and it's pretty amazing that we made this with chickpea porter and not obviously eggs. And finally, the best bit, blowtorching the meringue to caramelize or even slightly burn it, a bit like how you would with marshmallows over a fire. This is an amazing showstopper dessert. It does take a fair bit of time though, probably at least half a day, but it's totally worth it and really delicious. And it's definitely my mum's favourite dessert. Just like with the chocolate tart, it's a good idea to heat your knife in boiling water, wipe away the water, and then you've got a really hot knife so you get a nice clean cut of lemon meringue pie.
I am very excited to give this a try. Oh, that is incredible. Wow. The lemon curd is perfectly set. I'm just going to pick it up. Perfectly thin pastry. The Italian meringue is beautifully smooth and velvety, and then you get a slight charred marshmallow taste. Then you've got the lovely creamy lemon curd with a nice citrusy tang. And then finally, a beautifully crumbly, buttery pastry. Absolutely delicious. It's quite a bit of work, but if you really want to impress, then this is the pudding to do it with. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're looking for something a little bit more healthy, then check out this one.